Hello friends, and welcome to a brand new camera comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A56 against its predecessor, the A55. Right now we are recording at 4K 30 frames per second. Tell me in the comment section below which one do you think has better colors and which one has a better audio.
As usual, let's begin with some samples taken using the main cameras. But before that, let me quickly clarify the testing process in case you're unfamiliar with it. Each daylight picture was taken in auto mode, with no edits applied afterward. To ensure consistency, the scene optimizer was left enabled on both devices. When it comes to regular daylight photos, the results are quite similar overall since both phones share the same camera hardware and image processing style. That said, there are still some noticeable differences, so let me break them down. One key difference I observed is that when people are in the frame, the A56 tends to produce slightly brighter images. For instance, in this shot, my hair appears more visible on the A56, giving the photo a bit more clarity compared to the A55. On the other hand, when the scene contains a lot of white areas, the A55 often produces the brighter image. This is due to its tendency to overexpose light areas, as seen in this example. The building in the background looks more appealing on the A55, but in reality, its appearance is closer to what the A56 captures. When there's greenery in the shot, I found that both phones deliver nearly identical results. In these examples, both images are vibrant, with rich detail and an excellent dynamic range, making them almost indistinguishable from each other. The A56 introduces some minor improvements over the A55, but the latter was already an impressive performer. Even last year, I pointed out that the A55's camera was nearly on par with flagship models. The A56 continues this strong performance, delivering excellent photos with its main camera while refining some aspects of image processing. Both phones are also equipped with ultrawide cameras, and as expected, there is a noticeable drop in quality compared to their main lenses, with the A55 taking a bigger hit. As I mentioned earlier, it tends to overexpose objects with white tones, which is evident in some of these shots. The A56, on the other hand, produces slightly better results with more balanced exposure. In this next sample, I was actually surprised to see that the A55 captured a better image of me. On the right, my face appears more natural, whereas on the left, the entire picture looks overly bright, especially around my face. The A56 still has room for improvement, but since it was just released, future software updates could refine its processing. Just like with their main cameras, there were moments when I couldn't spot any differences between them. In certain shots, both phones delivered detailed and bright images, and their dynamic range was quite decent, especially considering their price range. One of the biggest differences between the two becomes apparent when taking pictures directly against the sun. Here, the A56 has a clear advantage. The older A55 captures a much darker image and introduces an unwanted purple tint, which I personally don't find appealing. The A56 maintains the natural colors of the scene and delivers a noticeably better-looking result with more balanced exposure. Both phones are capable of cropping in at 2x using their main cameras, but there is a noticeable difference in detail. The older A55 applies a strong over-sharpening effect, which makes the image appear somewhat unnatural. In contrast, the A56 produces a smoother result that looks more refined and realistic, making it the better-looking shot overall. When there are people in the frame, both phones perform well by preserving most facial details. Once again, I find myself preferring the image from the A56, but to be fair, the A55's result is still quite good. It doesn't fall short in any major way, and unless you're comparing them side by side, the differences aren't immediately obvious. That same over-sharpening effect on the A55 becomes apparent again in this next scene. Some may argue that sharper images look better, and I can understand that preference. However, I personally favor a slightly smoother image that appears more natural rather than one that looks artificially enhanced. It ultimately comes down to personal taste. Both devices also come with a dedicated macro camera. When capturing macro shots, it now seems that the A56 applies an over-sharpening effect, as seen in this example. While I personally don't take macro photos in everyday use, I find myself preferring the older A55 in this case for the same reason I mentioned earlier. That said, the A56 does have an advantage when it comes to depth, as its field of focus appears to be slightly greater. When it comes to portraits, both phones produce identical colors. Surprisingly, the background blur appears more natural on the A55, but the subject, which is me, is not as sharp on that device. For portrait shots, I prefer a phone that keeps me in clear focus and well separated from the background, which is exactly what the A56 does better. The only new camera on the A56 is the front-facing one, and the difference is immediately noticeable. The photo taken with the A56 looks significantly better compared to the older model. The A55's image appears flat, and my skin tone is far less accurate than what the A56 captures. In the next sample, the two are closer in quality, but I still find that I look more natural on the A56. In my opinion, this is a major improvement, especially considering that mid-range Samsung phones in the past often struggled with skin tone accuracy. When recording videos with their main cameras, we can see that both phones continue to perform similarly. The trees and greenery appear nearly identical on both devices, and even their stabilization is almost the same. The only notable difference I observed is in the sky. On the A55, it is completely overexposed, while on the newer A56, it looks somewhat more balanced. When recording with their ultra-wide cameras, the difference in color tone becomes immediately noticeable. The A56 produces a slightly darker image but with richer colors, while the A55 captures a brighter video where everything is more visible, though the colors appear flatter in comparison. To my eyes, the A56 looks better, but if you prefer the A55's brighter look, that's understandable as well. Moving to low light, and from now on, every picture is taken with night mode enabled. Just like in daylight, the front camera of the A56 performs better in terms of skin tone accuracy. While the A55 isn't bad by any means, I still prefer how I look on the A56. In areas with minimal light sources, both devices struggle to maintain quality. As much as I appreciate the new A56, I have to acknowledge that it is still a mid-range device and can't outperform in dim environments. That said, for its price, I think the A56 holds up well, and the A55 does just fine too. When it comes to the main cameras, in this particular case, I definitely prefer the A56. On this device, my face is brighter and more visible, and my hair is well defined, without the messiness seen in the A55. The older model tends to introduce a lot of noise in the background, while the A56 handles it much better, resulting in a cleaner image. On the other hand, when people aren't in the frame, the photos from both devices look almost identical. I believe the A56 is programmed to enhance images more when it detects people, which is why it outperformed in the previous example, but now both phones are on par with each other. In other samples, I noticed that the A56 is just a tad bit brighter compared to the A55. While brighter doesn't always mean better, in this case, I think it does, as the greenery looks more detailed and vibrant. For the most part, just like in daylight, their main cameras perform quite similarly. There are some slight differences that favor the A56, but overall, the A55 holds its own and is by no means inferior. Both devices are capable of capturing great shots, even though the A56 might edge out the A55 in certain situations. When it comes to their ultra-wide cameras, I noticed more differences, and some of the results were quite surprising to me. In the first sample, I prefer the A56's picture because it looks cleaner and sharper compared to the A55. In the next sample, I was surprised to find that the A55 actually performed better. The background lights are perfectly exposed in the A55, while they appear overexposed on the A56. The mural in the foreground looks better on the A56, but the overexposed lights are something I find annoying. The A56 makes a strong comeback in the next scene. The greenery looks much better and more defined. Meanwhile, the A55 image has a darker tone overall, and the one taken with the A56 just looks more visually pleasing. This same color tone difference is noticeable even in the next scene. Surprisingly, my face looks sharper on the A55, but when it comes to the rest of the scene, the A56 outperforms. My skin color, clothes, and even the background are better handled on the A56, making it the overall winner in this shot. At 2x, the A56 manages to retain more details, which gives it an advantage in sharpness. However, I find myself preferring the color tone of the A55, as it feels more natural and better captures the atmosphere of a nighttime scene. The same color difference carries over into the next scene. The A56 appears cleaner, sharper, and more well-defined, giving it a clear technical edge. Yet, just like in the previous sample, the photo taken with the A55 has a more pleasing and natural look, making it the more visually appealing option despite the A56's sharper details. When it comes to portraits, just like in daylight, I prefer the A56. In this particular scene, both phones produce nearly identical images in terms of sharpness, detail, and background blur. The only noticeable difference is my skin tone, which appears more natural on the A56, giving it a slight advantage. So, what do you think? Which one was your winner? Personally, I believe the A56 has seen some slight improvements, particularly with the front camera, but I don't think the difference is significant enough to justify an upgrade. If you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and for more content like this, please consider subscribing to my channel.